Moral Revolution community, welcome back to our podcast. I'm so glad you joined us today. We're going to dive into all things God's design for healthy sexuality. Let's talk about it.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Let's Talk About It podcast. I am very excited for today's conversation. I've been at Moral Revolution for about 10 years, spending lots of time finding resources and answers that help people, especially in places that we don't have a good answer for. And today's content, I have never heard from this perspective anywhere. It's not just that I think it's the best. I do think it's the best, but I've never heard it anywhere else. Joining me today is Caleb. Caleb's not only one of my friends, but he's also part of the Changed movement. If you're new here or don't know what Changed is a community of individuals who once identified as LGBTQ, somewhere in there, and then have now left that to follow Jesus. And now they create resources, give encouragement for people navigating the unwanted LGBT experience. Right? Caleb,
correct.
Besides everything, you're kind of the Bugs Bunny, the catch-all, the one who throws the pitch and catches it too. What exactly is your job title?
So my current job title is Director of Pastoral Care. We're ultimately making sure that people have access to resources and are connected to good support and care, helping equip pastors and leaders on how do we walk with people.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I do.
Okay. And it's why I think you're so great for this. Why I'm telling them why I think you're so great for it is because you work on both sides of the conversation. You have had this experience in your life, and you work with all the individuals who have this experience, as well as have been hurt by this experience.
Right.
As well as you work with the pastors, helping them kind of seeing their perspective and helping them on board into the conversation to kind of go, hey, there's a different way we could do this. I think it, full disclaimer, this conversation came out of we were having coffee one day and you just kind of started talking. You're like, man, if pastors knew this is kind of what everybody keeps doing and it's causing all these problems. And I'm like, bro, you have to we have to catch this and share it, because I would have absolutely said many of these things. I've heard people say these things and then not actually know, this is doing more harm than good. But it's out of a good heart. They're like, well, I want to help. And I think this is the right Christian response. Right?
Right.
Because historically, I'd say the church has not done a super great job at sexuality at large, which, you're here. That's why we exist, is trying to help level up the church's game on this. But when it comes to sexuality, or homosexuality, I should say, LGBT, it feels like we went from just... it's like the worst sin. It's above all other sins.
Right.
To just kind of going, well, because it was mysterious. We didn't understand it. I feel like with porn, with affairs, we still, we have kind of a grid for them now, but the LGBT experience just seems so obscure that our best shot is just, did you pray about it?
Right.
And then you're like, yeah, I prayed about it. Ask God to take it away. And you're like, do you want to pray some more? Don't get me wrong, prayer is very vital for this.
Prayer's great.
But similar to if you need help with your finances or with pornography or with anything else, you can pray about it and God comes through sometimes. He always comes through. Sometimes he comes through directly, and sometimes he's like, I actually am working on something bigger than just resolving your discomfort. Let's solve and heal a lot more.
Right.
And sometimes you just need tools and resources. So that's why we're here, why Changed here, why this podcast is happening is... we haven't always got this right, but we want to get it right.
Right.
So we're walking into the conversation. Say someone has this experience, they're walking in and they are talking to a pastor, or they're talking to their parent, or they're talking to a friend. They're talking to someone that they trust, that they have some respect for, maybe a little bit of fear of telling. What's their experience walking into this?
Yeah. So I think there's kind of several things going on. I think, like you were saying, the church largely has responded pretty poorly to this topic. And so when I was growing up, the main thing I heard was, if you're gay, you're going to hell. And
Awesome.
That was the only time we talked about LGBT at all, was on that front. And so I think anybody who's going into that conversation, there's some anxiety going into a conversation like that. Now,
Sure.
I think the church is doing a much better job of having those kinds of conversations now. And culture at large is doing a better job of having those conversations. But someone who has finally mustered up the courage to have a conversation with a pastor or a parent or a leader, they've got some pretty significant fear going into that. You know, is this person going to reject me on the other side? Am I going to find what I'm looking for, whatever that is? If that's coming into the conversation looking for affirmation or coming in looking for support and resources, there's going to be some fear. You know, am I going to lose my community as a result of this?
Yeah.
Like, is everyone going to know and then I'm out?
Yeah.
There's all kinds of anxiety attached to that.
Which I would say is probably very similar for people dealing with pornography or masturbation or like all the other sexual stuff.
Right.
But there's probably just not a big track record. Like you haven't really seen other people go. There's not a support group in the church for men dealing with porn where you're like, okay, there's some places, you know, have that. And you're like, okay, there's a track record that I see this handled well. Walking in, I don't know if I've seen anybody handle this well.
Right. And I think the other thing that we have to think about with that is, like for me, navigating same-sex attraction meant I had a whole lot of fear attached to connection to men specifically. You know, in my experience, men were unsafe and unreliable. And so, or largely unsafe and unreliable. There were a few safe and reliable men in my life.
Right.
But my majority experience with men was not safe. And so to even go into a conversation that I ended up having to have with a leader, it was one of the scariest things someone could have asked me to do, because I have to approach a man who I'm not sure is safe or reliable yet.
Yeah.
And yet I have to be really, really vulnerable and share where I'm at, and the potential for that to reinforce the fears that I have attached to who are men and are they actually going to come through for me was pretty substantial. And so I think a lot of people navigating that experience, they're going to go into that conversation terrified on multiple levels.
Yeah.
And I think
that takes a lot of courage, just a lot of boldness, just to be able to walk in and go, well, I mean, walk in, crawl in, like send the text going, hey, we need to talk.
Right.
I need to share something. Yeah.
Yep. It took me about 6 months from the moment I felt like the Lord was like, hey, you have to have a conversation with this leader and share with them. It took me about 6 months to find the courage to go into that conversation. And I went into it shaking. And I shook for probably 20 minutes after the conversation, even though I was responded to really well. And so even in that place, I think, so much anxiety goes into that. And I think there's anxiety on both sides. You know, I think people who are, you know, the pastor or the leader hearing that conversation, there's that, oh, how do I respond? Because culture right now is saying you have to respond certain ways, or everything you try is somehow the wrong answer. And so I think there's a lot of fear around that conversation for all parties.
Yeah, because you're wanting, like for the pastor, the leader, the parent, the trusted person, you're wanting to meet them with love and compassion, but you're also maybe kind of afraid to go, oh, I don't just want to affirm this and send you off down the track.
Right.
So there's like, oh, it's just a lot of like recognizing, oh, this is a very charged situation.
Right. And so I think out of that place of fear, we then respond with sometimes either religious responses or fearful responses, or we just don't know what to do, or we think because it's a big sin, we've got to somehow start shouting truth at people and help them, you know, quote a Bible verse to them or something that's going to somehow help them snap out of the thing that they're experiencing. And largely, I think it's connected to fear, and then also connected to just a lack of understanding of what's actually going on, which I think in general, the church hasn't been having the conversation to really know what's going on. And so there's some really great options for getting a better grid and a better understanding now. And so how do we navigate that, you know, is kind of the thing attached to that. But I think it comes from that place of fear and not knowing what to say. So then we just kind of default to, here's my religious thing, or here's a Bible verse, or, you know, however you respond in that moment.
It almost feels like we kind of throw a grenade in. They're like, I don't know what to do, so just let me just throw something and then run away because I feel uncomfortable and scared.
Right.
Okay, so over coffee, when you would just spilled out, like off the top of your head, like 7 things, and then we sat down, prepped for this podcast, and you came up with 10.
And there are more, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. So these are like kind of the top 10, we'll call them the top 10, but like 10 very common responses that I've gently called the failed first responses. Here's our 10 failed first responses when someone comes out and shares that they're dealing with LGBT experience. Let's go for it.
So I just want to say up front, if someone has, used any of these responses, like there's grace. Like we're learning, we're growing, we're going to teach you how to do this better in the future. But take any shame or guilt off if you have accidentally used one of these responses. But a couple things I want to say just on the front end before we jump straight into the responses is I think it helps to kind of set the stage by giving you a little bit of understanding on what are some of the needs and core things you need to keep in mind going into that conversation.
Okay.
And so the first one is just, we've got to realize that a core desire of any person navigating LGBT is to be fully known, accepted, valued, and loved for who they are, which is a human desire. And so I think we go into it and we think, I've got to share the truth. And in reality, we have to realize this is a person coming from a complicated experience who's looking for love and care. And so I think that helps kind of shift the pressure off of like, I have to convince them of something into how do I actually take care of the person in front of me? The thing they're looking for is to be known, to be loved, to be valued, to be seen for who they are right now, not who they might be, not where they used to be, right? Just right now. And kind of with that, what I'll say is that relational equity is key to influence. There's that phrase, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so as we go into our responses with people, we have to think through that lens of how are we building relational equity or how are we damaging the relationship? And even if you have to have a hard conversation, we'll talk about how to do that and still keep building. So I think if we keep those things in mind and realize that people have been really wounded by relationship, and usually wounded even from sharing their experience, then it's going to kind of help you go, here's how I respond better.
And it also takes the pressure off of like, I don't need to correct your theology, prove you right or wrong, or like do this stuff. Is like, my goal right now is just to care for you and create a safe space for you to land.
Right.
And this is not a one-time conversation. I think it's similar to like we tell parents, this is not a one-time, the sex talk is not a one-time talk.
Right.
This is an ongoing relationship that you're walking someone. So like first goal, create a safe space.
Right.
Kind of for them to land.
Exactly. So with that, here are some failed first responses.
Yes.
I don't recommend you do these. So the first failed first response, this one we'll see in the church all the time, is assuming that the person's relationship with Jesus must be really struggling and telling them that they just need to go pray about it. So I personally know people who, when they shared with a leader, their response was, you just need to go pray about this. Most people who are navigating this experience have been processing and praying about this for a while. So if they were raised in the church, even if they weren't raised in the church, they've probably been processing this for a while. And if they weren't raised in the church and you tell them to go pray about it, they're going to think you're crazy. So this response,
which praying about it is it's the great goal, but what does that kind of communicate to them?
Yeah. So prayer is hugely helpful on this topic.
Like, hey, let's bring in God into this and see what he's saying. But it could sound.
But what we communicate when we say, hey, you and Jesus just need to go talk about this is, I'm not willing to talk to you about this. I'm so uncomfortable with this conversation that I'm not actually willing to listen to this any further. And so please don't talk to me.
Ouch.
Go talk to Jesus.
Yeah.
The other thing that this response does with it kind of assumes that their relationship with the Lord must be struggling. And then we're going to start to respond to them from that place of, well, here's all the things you need to do to build up your relationship with the Lord. A bunch of people I know, myself included, my struggle with same-sex attraction actually drove me deeper into the heart of Jesus. And so my relationship with Jesus was solid on a lot of levels. Yeah. There were areas of immaturity in my life and in my walk, but for the most part, my walk with the Lord was pretty close. Like I had a conversational dialogue with the Lord every day to kind of engage, not just here's what's going on with my sexuality today, but here's how I need you to show up today because I'm not sure what to do, And so when we come in and we just assume their relationship with the Lord must be struggling, we're also discounting all the hard work that they've already done with the Lord.
Dang. Yeah.
And so, and then they go back into that place of going, well, you don't see me, you don't know me. Because if you
feel more isolated, more ashamed, more disconnected.
Right. So if the goal is to make them feel seen, loved, and valued, then assuming that their relationship struggles is not going to be helpful on that front. So that's the first one. Don't do that.
Guilty. Carry on.
I mean, I probably was guilty of that even in walking with people early on, where it was like, well, have you talked to Jesus about that? It's like, well, probably. Like, people have probably processed with the Lord for years. My journey, it was years of me begging God to take this away from me and trying to engage him in the conversation before I went and talked to somebody. And I'm like, if they had responded to me saying, you just need to go pray about that, or your walk with the Lord struggles, then I'd have gone, well, forget you.
Right.
Which,
by the way, that's a great concept is great.
Right.
Delivery is not. And so we're circling back in a little bit to go, okay, here's how you bring in the right principles.
Right.
In a gentle way. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So, second one, and this is one that I actually feel like the church has probably done the most damage with, is telling them they just have a demon. So
that's nice.
There's a pretty consistent dynamic that we see within this experience where people are like, this is just demonic, or this is something that we just need to pray through and break off, and you're going to be free from this as we do that. Which, hear me clearly, the enemy is alive and well, and there are absolutely demonic things that can influence our lives and influence this struggle. I think we, to the comment on prayer, we need regular times of prayer to bind the work of the enemy and clear out anything that is getting in the way. But when we engage with just, this is a demon, this is a spirit of homosexuality that we need to cast out or whatever.
Because you hear people like on YouTube getting delivered from the spirit of homosexuality or
right.
the spirit of Jezebel or the spirit of whatever.
Yes.
And it's gone. And so it's easy to assume you're like, oh,
right.
Step one, let's clear the house.
Right. So Ken Williams, who is one of the founders of Changed, actually talks about a deliverance session he had where he legitimately was delivered of some stuff. And yet within an hour or two afterwards was feeling same-sex attraction for the man who just delivered him. And so coming in and saying it's just a demon, it kind of oversimplifies the experience on some levels. And it also comes in and says that we're going to fix this pretty quick. We're just going to cast this thing out and then you're going to be good to go. And then it doesn't work because we can't actually promise a person transformation. That's not something I'm able to do, is to say, here's what's going to happen. We're going to pray for you and then you're going to get completely set free. Jesus is the one who is setting people free. And so I want to pray. I want to ask the Lord to do work on people's hearts.
Which we would say we do believe transformation is
right.
possible. Change is possible.
Absolutely.
So we believe that. We're just saying, hey, it may not look a certain way.
Right. And it's not going to happen in 1, 2, or even 5 prayer times, no matter how much deliverance is actually happening in that space. But this is where the LGBT community comes in with the you can't pray away the gay kind of narrative, is people go to their pastor needing help, and the response from the church is we just need to pray and get rid of this thing. When in reality, the wounds and the trauma from your childhood have helped shape your sexuality in a whole bunch of different ways. And if we come in just trying to cast out a demon, we haven't healed the trauma. We haven't healed the wound or the belief that came into play that taught you that you don't want to be a man, or whatever it is. Yeah. We haven't actually addressed that issue. And as a result, the person doesn't actually find some of the healing and the freedom that they need in that prayer time because we haven't actually addressed the issue. That's the thing I realized in my own journey is I was begging God to take away this experience, but he needed time to work on some of the wounds and the things that happened to me in order for me to even have a chance at experiencing something differently. But until I actually dealt with those wounds and dealt with the things that I was believing about myself and others in that situation, I was going to keep operating from a place that was already a little broken and dysfunctional. So I couldn't choose something else, even if I'd wanted to. Because the other thing that happens here is if I pray for you and you don't get free, it's your fault, right? You clearly didn't want it enough. You clearly didn't actually have, the faith you needed or whatever. It's like, that's not actually the heart of Jesus. And so not helpful.
Correct me if I'm wrong here. How I'm kind of understanding it is deliverance is a tool in the toolbox, but it's not the tool that's always needed. It may be the hammer, but you're needing a screw. And so if you just go hammering stuff, you're going to bend up and break a bunch of things that are need to be there.
Right. Yeah. The lies in the belief systems was probably the biggest thing that I had to figure out in my own journey. Was like, I didn't need the big deliverance moment. I needed to actually unlearn a few things, break agreement with some lies, and choose to start operating in the truth that the Lord was revealing instead.
Yeah.
So that's what I would do. So the next one here is the Apostle Paul's response. This is just your thorn in the flesh, and you're going to struggle with it for the rest of your life. This is the most hopeless response I have ever heard, and yet it's one we hear all the time. One of my favorite verses that I held on to in the middle of my own journey was John 10:10. Jesus says, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He said, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. Yeah. And when I read that verse, it hit me. It was like, life abundantly doesn't look like struggling with something for the rest of your life. Like, that's not life abundantly. And so when we approach it from this place of like, this is just the thing you're going to struggle with your entire life, it's hopeless. It says there's nothing that can be done. This response often tells people that either God can't or he won't engage their struggle. Why would I serve a God who can't or won't engage with me? Is he the all-powerful God of the universe, or does he actually care anything about my life is kind of the landing point there.
One of those two have to give.
Right. And
both
so
pretty big accusations on God.
Right.
That we throw out there.
So if we want to breed offense towards the Lord, then this is a great option.
Yeah.
But the goal is not to do that. So let's not do that. God didn't design people to experience LGBT. And so when we engage this topic with him, he actually wants to step in and bring solutions and peace and comfort and hope to these places. And so if you're curious about, are we sure God didn't design that? There's not a genetic reason for it. We can point you to that elsewhere, but, and actually we'll talk about it later, but there's a course that you can get that'll actually unpack some of that. But God didn't design us to deal with this. So when we actually engage this topic, he wants to engage. He wants to meet us here and now. And that's my story. And that's the story of countless friends that I have who have all walked away from an LGBT identity. And what we've found was fulfillment, peace, and hope with Jesus. And so don't give them discouragement of you're not going to change. This answer also communicates that you're doomed to a life of celibacy.
This is similar to like, this is just your cross to bear.
Yeah, I mean,
another language.
Yeah,
same
this
concept.
is just your cross to bear.
Suck it up and get used to it, essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
You're doomed to a life of celibacy. You'll never have a fulfilling relationship or get to have a normal human experience is kind of what this communicates. And so
that sounds like God.
Right.
Sarcasm
Terrible.
for anybody who can't see my face.
Right. Terrible. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not an element of suffering and walking with Jesus that we have to do. That my starting point for my journey was leaning into the worthiness of Jesus and saying, Jesus, you're worthy of my life and my sexuality, regardless of if this changes. So there are elements of, yes, the cost of following Jesus is to take up your cross, right?
Yeah.
And so something has to die. And so it may feel like death on several levels. But what are you gaining in that place? And for me, I found hope, I found fulfillment, I found peace, I found joy that I didn't find in an LGBT identity. And so when we keep that in mind, then it's like, yes, okay, we're going to walk this out. It may be tough, but the Lord does want to meet us in that space, and he does. And there are literally thousands of people that I'm connected to who have all had this same experience. So the next one, this is another big one that we have in the church in particular, is you just need to go date the opposite sex.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not helpful for several reasons. Pushing someone to a opposite sex relationship before they're actually ready for that, before the Lord has actually done some healing in their life, is more likely to reinforce an LGBT identity than it is to help them break free of it. And if you're telling them just go date the opposite sex, you're also not actually acknowledging the fact that they're saying, I can't do that. But it also, if you push them into a relationship, they get into the relationship, and then when it doesn't work because they can't make it work, they walk out the other side going, well, it's just further evidence for why I'm gay. Or even worse, they end up in a marriage, sometimes even with kids, And years into their marriage, they leave the marriage, leave a wife and kids, go back into the gay community, and come out as having this horrible experience of having been pushed into this thing that they never wanted and they were never able to really find peace and satisfaction in. And more damage has been done.
Yeah.
Now they've got a wife and kids who they're walking out on. And so more people are impacted negatively on this front. But this often reinforces the LGBT identity and ideology rather than helping them go, oh, actually, maybe I am man enough, or maybe I am enough as a woman. It doesn't actually help them step into that.
Because you're essentially suppressing what needs to be addressed.
Right. Yeah. Again, we've ignored all of the past wounds and trauma that need to be addressed that might actually give them a chance to be able to kind of walk a different direction, So not helpful. Another big one here is telling them, oh, I know every LGBT person's issue is fill in the blank with one thing you think is going to work. Right. I mean, I've heard that one many times.
Yeah. You've been sexually abused.
Right. So these two things, both the here's the fill in the blank answer or the abuse answer. Again, this oversimplifies the experience. And it says, I know better what you've experienced, even though maybe I don't have your experience. And then with the sexual abuse one in particular, not every person who is navigating LGBT experience has experienced sexual abuse. Now, the rates are pretty high, but not every person has. And so, again, we're coming in oversimplifying. We even have a
resource, self-discovery. We're talking about how childhood trauma leads to gender confusion and these types of things later.
Right. Yeah, it's a great resource there. If you're looking for the science, here's some scientific studies as well as stories of people who say, hey, here's how my childhood trauma actually shaped my sexuality.
And it's very clear, from someone who doesn't have the experience, you can walk in and just read it and go, oh, that totally makes sense. I can see how you get there. And I can see how I need to approach this differently. Yeah.
Right. So that's a great resource. But the other thing that happens when we bring up sexual abuse is we might actually trigger a person's sexual abuse pain. And most of us are not actually equipped as licensed trauma therapists to help walk people through that pain. You might have some tools in your tool belt for inner healing, and that's great if stuff comes up while you're walking with a person. Engage with those tools, walk with them in that, but help get them connected to somebody who can actually walk with them instead of oversimplifying their experience and potentially triggering substantial pain. Not worth it. Not a good idea. It may come up as you walk with them. That's just the reality of that. But
let it come up. Don't go digging.
Yeah, don't go digging for stuff that the Lord hasn't brought up. Another one is telling them something like, it's wrong, or this is goes against God's design, right? Like, that, right? Like kind of coming at it from that, here's the truth piece of things. Again, it kind of says, like, have you not thought about this? Did you really not think about the fact that this isn't God's design for humanity? Or did you really not think about the fact that living this way is, this horrible thing? Whatever it is that your mentality is, it comes out with an attitude. It comes out with a tone that
almost
says
like a self-righteousness.
Yeah, exactly. It's a religious response. It's, I know better than you, even though, again, this is your lived experience, not mine.
Because while that statement is true, the attitude and the approach that you're coming into it is the thing that does the damage.
Right.
So
exactly.
What's that kind of communicate to them then?
So again, this is saying, you know better than me, even though you don't know what it means to walk in my shoes at all. And it also says, maybe you're not a person I can keep talking to about this, because you're going to just start quoting scriptures at me. You're going to start trying to tell me all the things I need to know without actually caring for my heart in any step in that journey. So again, bad idea. Don't do that. Another one kind of has two parts to it, but it's treating them as if they're unsafe or can't be trusted around the same sex, children, or you. So kind of there are two sides to this one. One is assuming that they're going to really be struggling all the time if they're in a dorm or a locker room setting, if you're spending one-on-one time with them, how are they experiencing all of this? So that's one side to this. And with that, it's the assumption piece that gets us in trouble. And so I even had a student years ago who, was living in a dorm setting, and I happened to know that all of the guys in this dorm ran around in their underwear all the time. And this guy's struggling with same-sex attraction. And so I knew I had to have a conversation with him. And the temptation going into that conversation was, if I were in his shoes, this would have been difficult for me.
Yeah.
And so I kind of assumed it probably was, but I had thankfully learned not to assume anything at this point. And so I went in and I was just like, hey, I know this is a dynamic. How has that been for you?
Ooh, excellent question.
Right. Yeah. Questions are the best way
how has that been?
to get information
how are you experiencing
here.
This? Great,
right.
Great questions.
So his response to me was, it's been incredible. He said, they all know my story and they treat me like one of the guys. It's been this healing experience for me. And I'm like, praise God. Like,
not the way I saw it going.
Not
okay.
Not at all what I expected either.
Yeah.
And so totally shifted even some of my own thoughts on that of like, oh, you're right. Not every interaction like this might be triggering for this person. And so I don't want to assume that it is triggering for them.
Like I have to, I like think, because I was like, oh, there's part of me that thinks that or has considered that. And then I'm like, where did I get that from? So I'm kind of like sozoing myself over here going, where did that come from? And then I realized, oh, like a lot of movies or like even a lot of the kind of out there flamboyant gay community is much more sexual.
Right.
And they are very assertive with it. My brother and sister-in-law came to San Francisco at one point, and we were walking down the street going to a restaurant, and a gay guy hit on him, and it was like he's holding the hand of his wife, hit on him, just checking out his butt and stuff. And it was just kind of like, oh, and so you think if someone's struggling, then I instantly probably just plug them into that person to go, oh, they must be. It doesn't work that way for opposite sex. Like, I'm not physically attracted and sexualizing every woman.
Right.
So why would I expect that to be the case? If
You're probably not their type. Like, that's just the bottom line.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, no, it's true. Like, there is a substantial amount of sexualization that happens within the gay community. And so, like, it is a hypersexualized culture on a lot of levels for most of kind of the gay community experience. But I think what you're speaking to actually gets to the second half of kind of this comment.
You
did. It was perfect. But it gets to kind of the second half of this, which is that there's a mentality that I think because of some of the hypersexualization that we see within the gay community, it gives us this mentality that says a gay person is some kind of raging sexaholic and they're going to come on to literally anyone and everything,
right.
You know,
That's
like even growing up, the mentality was, you know, if they're gay, then they're going to abuse children. And I'm like, well, that's not actually the case. You know, like it might be the case for some of them. You know, I'm not saying somebody who's embraced an LGBT identity is somebody you want walking with your children. I would say mostly actually because I don't really want them influencing my children with LGBT ideology. You know, that's not something I want. But I have countless friends who have left an LGBT identity who are absolutely the people you want walking with your children for several reasons. One, they've experienced abuse themselves, and they actually care very deeply about protecting children from the same pain.
Yeah.
So they might actually pick up on somebody who would be a sexual predator a lot faster than you will because they remember what it was like to be that kid.
And they've walked through the healing
right
to be aware, but not triggered.
Right. The other thing that they often do is they know what it was like to experience rejection and pain growing up. And childhood is kind of a traumatic experience for most people, you know? Like,
I don't know anybody who made it through adolescence that are like, that was great.
Right.
I can't wait to be a preteen and teenager again. And
right. Said no one ever.
Yeah.
But they remember what it was like to struggle to find friends and connection and to feel different. And so those are the kinds of people that I would want helping engage with my kids and helping them realize, no, your version of humanity is just as necessary and needed as everybody else's. And so this belief system that an LGBT person is going to sexualize you or your children and be unsafe, I'm like, if they haven't given you a reason to not trust them, then let's trust them. All right. So the next one is this one. The next three actually come from a place of I actually care about you and I want to help. But these are some kind of pitfalls that we can slip into if we're not careful. So they come from a really good place of I'm ready. I'm not afraid of this conversation. I'm going to walk with you. but I still don't quite get it. And so I might misstep here. So the first one is we only focus on the issue of sexuality instead of focusing on discipling the whole person. This is a discipleship journey. And so if we spend all of our time focusing on only sexuality, what we do is we're not actually becoming healthy in every area that we need to actually help us walk this out. And actually our focus then stops being on Jesus and starts being on sexuality. I wasted years of my journey trying to fix my sexuality versus learning what it meant to actually be a disciple. What does it look like to follow Jesus, to be a son, to know who I am, instead of how do I fix my sexuality?
Yeah.
And so this approach is not helpful. We need to not ignore the conversation around sexuality. But we need to walk with the whole person. It's a holistic approach. And so there's a lot of stuff that we need to engage with and just helping disciple a person who's navigating this experience, but it looks the same as everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the rest of life, like this is the fruit. We say this all the time. This is the fruit. And if you look at just the fruit, you'll never find out what the roots are that actually caused it.
Right.
Like if you're dealing with porn, you're like, well, stop. Put the blockers on, throw away your computer, smash it, do whatever. And you're like, the reality is, does anyone know you? What's really going on in your life? How are you dealing with your emotions? Are you stuffing them all? And then you have an episode where you go over here.
Right. Yeah. And with this one too, I think, that hyper fixation on the topic of sexuality, the attraction piece is often the last piece to change. And I think some of this comes down to some of the neuroscience we know with, neuroplasticity, that it's like until we've healed the wounds that are causing us to operate a certain way, then we don't have a chance to start to choose a different direction.
Yeah.
And so if we're spending all of our time focused on what hasn't changed in our sexuality, we start to miss all of the things that the Lord has actually been doing in our lives and all the ways we are changing. I had to regularly slow down and go, all right, how am I different than I was last week or 2 years ago or when I started this journey? And when I would do that, I would realize so much had changed. I was more alive. I was more fulfilled than I'd ever been. And yet I was still struggling with the attraction. And then eventually that started to shift and change. And I was like, what is this thing? I don't understand. And so focusing only on sexuality is not going to be a helpful option there. We want to disciple the whole person. All right. Next one here is we don't want to overwhelm them with a list of all the things that we feel like they need to change or adjust in their life now. So this one comes particularly when you have maybe a man who acts a little more effeminate or a woman who has a few more masculine traits. And we come in and we go, now that you're a Christian or now that you're choosing to follow Jesus, here are all of the things you have to change. And what we do is we overwhelm them with a bunch of things that they think, I will never be able to do this. And they eject from the process and stop walking this journey. And the danger here is that we're actually going to cut out something that Jesus put there. Because we have some incredibly creative people.
Unpack that. Okay, yeah. Like, tell me.
So we have some incredibly creative people in the LGBT community. And I know men who they love fashion. They love, all of these different things that we in typical Western culture would say this is not considered masculine. And therefore, if you're going to embrace being a man and living a heteronormative life, then you've got to let go and reject all of these things that aren't stereotypically masculine traits. But what we do is we've actually eliminated something from their life that Jesus put there. They actually have a gift on their life in those areas, and we need them to operate in that.
So we give them the option. So you can either trim out a part of your personality and a part of the gifting, and follow Jesus in quotes, or you can go live that out and live, and then therefore you must be gay still, or you must still be struggling with this stuff. Right.
And we don't realize that's the options we're giving them, but those are absolutely the options that we're giving people.
Yeah.
I had a season in my journey where I thought, okay, if I'm going to pursue the Lord, then I have to somehow try to embrace more stereotypical masculinity. I actually lost more of myself and was more miserable than when I decided I wanted to embrace an LGBT identity. And I wasn't even good at being, this stereotypical version of masculinity. That's just not who I am. And there's no way I could ever be that. And yet I was more miserable when I thought this is what I was supposed to be versus when I'm going, well, I guess being gay is the better option because at least I feel more like myself. And a large part of that comes down to, here are my interests. Here are the things that I have, again, gifts on my life that I excel in, and ways that the Lord actually created me and designed me to operate that I tried to cut out of my life in order to try to meet the stereotype. And it caused more dysfunction and more brokenness in my life. I was more likely to eject and make a really big mistake in that season than I was when I'm like,
you totally see it.
Here I am.
Yeah.
So don't overwhelm them with a list. We'll talk about this later, but follow the Holy Spirit's leading. It's the best option. Another big one that we do in the church sometimes is we share their struggle with someone who's not part of the solution or not going to be walking with the person.
As in like gossip, or as in like you're trying to be a relief valve to kind of go, hey, can you give me some thoughts on this? Like what do you mean?
So this has some pretty subtle approaches. Sometimes it's full on gossip, and churches need to nip that one real fast.
Sure.
On all levels, not just with this issue. But sometimes this has a more subtle approach, and it's like, oh, I need to go tell this person over here so they can kind of help keep an eye on things when this person's in this environment. And then I need to go tell this person over here so they can help over here and kind of monitor things over here. And what we think is we're helping set this person up for success by getting multiple people aware of their struggle and aware of what's going on to kind of help them out. But pretty soon, our whole church is talking about the person and no one's talking to them. Because
in the situation you just described, that's you trying to create an environment around them rather than invite them in, like you being invited into their process. You're trying to hijack their process and you kind of orchestrating what you think is best without actually their invitation.
Right. And
or permission.
Again, it's like they're the ones who need to be in control of their story. Remember, there's a lot of pain there. And so if I'm telling everybody else their story and they don't have control over that, I'm actually only adding to the pain and the trauma of their life. And so let's not do that. But it's kind of subtle sometimes because we kind of approach it from that place of this is helping them, right? But it's like, no, if we don't have permission to share with somebody else, or if that person's not going to be a part of the solution walking with them, then they don't have any business knowing unless that person decides to tell them. And I would say the only exception to that is if I need to go to one of my leaders to get input on how to walk with this person better. But again, I want to get permission. I want to say, hey, I actually need to have a conversation with my leader so that I can better support you.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
And then it's always okay because people want help when they're seeking help. And so, but don't do those things. So those are the failed first responses.
Cool. So that's awesome. We've done super great as a church. I've been guilty of a lot of those things. How do we start to go, okay, it's not this way. What's some approaches that we do take as we're kind of wrapping up here? What's our first couple steps that we need to think about?
Yeah. So when responding to someone in this issue or navigating this experience, there's some kind of key things I always say, regardless of whether or not they're embracing an LGBT identity or whether or not they're like, hey, I need help and I'm sharing my story with you so that you can help. So here's how I respond. First things first, check your face. Some of us have more expressive faces, and if we communicate shock or surprise, they're going to walk away going, I can't keep having this conversation. It's too much for you. So the goal isn't to have a fake face. We're not trying to fake it, but we are trying to communicate compassion and care. And if your face accidentally says something it shouldn't, clean up your mess. Yeah. Have a conversation. Say, hey, I think my face may have said something that it didn't need to. I'm not afraid of this conversation. Please, let's talk about it. How are you? I want to check in.
Great.
So check your face. The second thing here is we want to engage with empathy, and we want to honor the place we've been given and honor the courage it took to get there. And what I want to say with that is empathy is one of your greatest tools in this whole process. When I'm asking questions, tell me more about your experience. Wow, what was that like for you? That sounds like it must have been lonely. Tell me more about that. Whatever it is, when we engage with empathy, there are two things happening. One, we're building relational equity. So if we have to have a hard conversation at some point, we have the ability to do that and it not be so painful.
Yeah.
The other thing this does is it brings greater clarity on where this person's at. Are they seeking to embrace an LGBT identity, or are they coming wanting solutions? They just don't know what else to do.
Right.
And again, honor the place you've been given. Like they've invited you into a pretty sacred and deep part of their heart. So I want to honor that place carefully. From there, I want to encourage them with the truth of their unique identity. And so
their unique identity.
Their unique identity. Yes. So the goal here isn't, here's a generic thing about, oh, you're such a good man of God. Like we want to get more specific because, again, we want them to feel seen and known and valued.
Yeah.
And so how have you seen them be an incredible man?
Ooh.
Like let's encourage them in that space. And so say I'm feeling like, hey, this is one of the most compassionate men I know. Then I might say something like, hey, I love how kind and caring you are of other people. Like it's an incredible part of your masculinity and the way God designed you as a man. You're so compassionate. It is such a strength and such a gift.
Because you're kind of reallocating it. Because they're like, well, I'm just like all the other women. It's kind and gentle and stuff. And it's like, so I identify that way. It's like, no, that's a very masculine trait.
Right.
That you're identifying.
Right.
I know. Ignore stereotypes for a second. Look at God. That's a very masculine trait.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the most encouraging things my dad ever said to me when I was struggling with feeling connected to masculinity one day, my own masculinity, he's like, Jesus was a man when he was on the earth, right? He's like, I see a whole lot of Jesus in you. If that's not man enough, I don't know what is. I got all kinds of jacked up afterwards. Like I had to go weep that one out for a little bit.
Dude, especially coming from your dad.
Oh yeah. It was huge.
Yes.
It was huge. And so what is the compassionate version of, this person, or what is the strength that you see on their life, their identity that you want to encourage and reinforce? If they are saying they want to embrace a transgender identity, then I'm probably not going to tie that to masculinity or femininity because I don't want to add pain.
Okay.
So again, building relational equity, not taking. But if they're saying, I'm struggling with these things, let me encourage that and let me connect it to masculinity or femininity as often as I can.
Yeah.
From there, we want to assure them nothing's going to change. I'm not going anywhere.
In your relationship.
In our relationship.
Okay,
yeah. It's like, hey, you shared this with me. I'm not thrown off by that. Nothing's going to change here. I'm going to keep walking with you. You're my friend. I want to keep doing this.
I'm with you to the end of the line.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, that applies to both somebody embracing the identity as well as somebody who is seeking help. If they're embracing that, there's obviously some boundaries we may end up having to have. But probably we still need to keep being their friend. They've probably not given us any reason to start cutting that off. And then the next thing with that is we want to increase intentionality moving forward. Like, remember, they're expecting rejection. They're expecting you to walk out. So I'm going to increase my intentionality. I'm going to send you a text the day that we had a conversation or the next day and say, hey, you shared some really vulnerable things with me today. How are you feeling today? Just want you to know I'm praying for you, thinking about you. When can we meet next? Right? When can we be intentional to actually connect some more?
Because they're expecting you to run away and reject them. You may have the temptation to go, I'm just afraid. I don't even know what to do. So I'm going to run.
Right.
But what you're saying, you're just going, hey, just lean in to go, hey, let's meet again.
Exactly.
And the next conversation doesn't have to be about your sex, your sex life. It doesn't have to be about sexuality. Like, let's meet again. Hey, how's it going? Like, you touch base on it. We could also go, like, what's been happening in your life? Like,
right. My spiritual dad would come and find me after I'd had this really intense conversation with him. He would just come up to me, give me a hug, and just ask how I was doing. And not because he was trying to check up on me and make sure I wasn't like messing my life up, but because he genuinely cared about my life. He genuinely cared about what was happening in my world. He wanted to get to know me and get to know the ways that I needed support and care, not just in the realm of sexuality. And so be intentional on a bunch of different levels. It's an exhausting journey sometimes, and sometimes we need to just go have fun. Be intentional to bring fun and connection into that space. So from there, those are kinds of the things I would start with, regardless of what the person's navigating. Yeah. If there's somebody who is saying, hey, I am seeking resources, I'm seeking a way out of this, then I would add a couple of things to that. I'm going to give them hope. So, hey, here are a bunch of testimonies on the Change Movement website of people who walked away from LGBT and found fulfillment and hope in Jesus. Or, hey, here's something from my own life that felt hopeless or felt impossible, and here's how God met me and changed everything. Give them a little bit of hope. Ask God to lead you, follow his guidance. He has the perfect path towards restoration for this person. I want to stay in step with him. And so what is he bringing up? What is he focusing on right now? That's what we're going to focus on. Again, not the list of all the things that are going to overwhelm you. What's he asking them to walk with right now? Ask him how you can partner with them is the next one. Hey, what are your expectations? What are you hoping for? Are you wanting to meet regularly? Are you wanting to get connected to some other resources and some other support? What are your expectations? We may not always have the bandwidth to have a ton of time to meet with people. And if that's the case, that's okay. Just communicate that. Something like, hey, I am realizing in this season, my life is a lot more chaotic than I would like it to be. And so I'm a little worried that I'm not going to be able to show up for you in all the ways I want to.
Great.
Is there someone else
Yep.
that we can pull into this so that you have the support that you're looking for as well? And then I'm going to keep being engaged as much as I can be. Again, increase that intentionality, honor that place. But how do I help them get connected? Do they know someone? Do I know someone? Find them someone. And
something I think, I don't know if it was your pastor or Ken's pastor said in their journey, is something along the lines of, he's like, you know what? He's like, thanks for sharing this with me. He's like, I honestly don't really know where to go from here. This is kind of new for me, but I'm with you and we'll figure it out together.
Right.
And it was just that kind of like, you don't have to have all the solutions. Like we have a bunch of resources we can link down below to help you kind of give, here's just some steps, but just that like confidence of going, I'm with you.
Right.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah. My spiritual parents had no idea what to do, but they believed Jesus could meet me and they provided space for me to figure it out with him and with them.
Yeah.
So it's huge.
Great first responses.
Yes. Yeah. Pray for them often. Prayer is powerful and effective.
We do believe in it.
Yes.
See? Coming back around. It's true. We really do. Yeah.
Do that often. Prayer is great. So kind of with that, then how would I respond to somebody who is wanting to embrace an LGBT identity?
After you've kind of asked the open questions, met them with empathy.
Right.
Ask how your experience it was, what they're kind of looking for.
Yep.
And then they're going, I'm just letting you know this is where I'm going in life.
Right. So you've established this person is trying to embrace this and not seeking any kind of support or resources out. Couple things I just want to mention on the front end before we say that, how to respond there is, again, remember, relational equity is key for influence. The goal in this conversation is that I respond to you in a way that is both truthful and loving, but builds connection. If I overemphasize the truth, I'm going to cause them to feel condemned and they're never going to want to talk to me again. If I overemphasize love, I run the risk of them never knowing what I believe until one day something forces me to share my belief. And now they feel like I've lied to them for years.
Ooh.
And so we have to be really, really careful how we approach that in being honest with our beliefs while making sure they deeply feel cared for and loved by us in the process. And again, that's where empathy is such a key tool for you on this journey. So roughly how I would respond to someone who is saying they're embracing an LGBT identity is I'm going to thank them. Hey, thank you so much for sharing this with me. It means a lot that you trust me with this part of your life. I know that took a lot of courage, and I think that's, I feel really honored that you would invite me into this space.
Probably not what most people are feeling right away.
Right. Not at all.
Yeah. But what they need to hear.
Right. So
for the long run. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we're thanking them for all of that. We're honoring that space. And then from there, I'm going to say something like, hey, I want to be honest with you so that you're not surprised or hurt later. But I do believe in a traditional interpretation of the Bible. I don't think this is Jesus's best for your life. But I believe 100% that he loves you, that he wants relationship with you, that he came for everybody. And so my job as a follower of Jesus is to love you the same way he does. And so I'm not going anywhere. This doesn't change anything in our relationship. I still want to be your friend. I want to be a safe place for you to share and to be vulnerable if you need to. Yeah. Now, we have to realize saying that hey, I don't agree that this is Jesus's best for you, that's going to be a withdrawal from the relational equity we've built.
Yeah.
And so the way I then flip that is I come back to that place of empathy and I say, hey, I know a lot of people when they're coming out, it's kind of a painful experience. They lose friends, they lose family even sometimes. And so how has that been for you? Yeah. Tell me about that experience. And then I show some care and engage with the things that they're responding to so that I can kind of help build back some of that relational equity that I've just had to pull from in that process. But that's how I would respond to somebody who's saying, hey, I'm embracing this thing and, take it or leave it, So I want to keep connection because that relationship, it'll give me access to them to then be able to point them to Jesus along the journey as well.
That's amazing. Dang, there's so many unique things that you kind of find in here, but then at the same time, if you look at it through your own story, like through your own journey with Jesus, there's stuff you felt hopeless in, there's stuff you felt stuck in, there's stuff you've had to repent of, there's stuff you've needed deliverance for, there's stuff that you've needed to change your mindsets for. Like it's a common human experience.
Right.
It's a common discipleship experience.
Yep, exactly.
With just unique factors and settings.
Right.
So like we've said previously here, there's a lot of content here that we could talk about. And Change just finished a video series called Navigating LGBTQ. This is basically for any Christian, whether you're a leader, you're a pastor, you're a parent, you're a college student, you're a high schooler, you're like, I'm trying to figure out, how do I navigate God's heart? How do I navigate this topic with God's heart, both with gentleness, with empathy, with compassion, with truth, and not fall into the pitfalls? We'll put a link to it down below. It's called Navigating LGBTQ. And if you're a pastor specifically, you guys made an add-on just for churches, just to go, here's church foundations that are like, here's what you play for your staff. Like, here's how you kind of set up a culture in your church that is facilitating healing and acceptance and love and truth and walking people in that journey.
Right.
So that's awesome. You can check that out down below in the show notes. Caleb, you're brilliant. Thank you for not only walking people through this journey, but also finding a way to articulate it and share it with the rest of us so we can learn how to love people better.
Thank you guys for listening. If you want to learn more and check out all of our awesome content, be sure to head to our website at moralrevolution.com and our socials, Instagram, Facebook, all of them. But before you leave, don't forget to like, review, subscribe, all of the things. We want you guys to come back and join us. We enjoyed having you. See you next time.